Strabane? Did that go as you expected?
Well, let me read that.
Stuart Littlemore QC says he gently but firmly pushed away a reporter who was in front of him and his client, the former Labor MP Eddie Obeid, as they left the Independent Commission Against Corruption this week.
It just goes to show that for Media Watch hosts, gently but firmly shoving journalists around is a habit that's very hard to break. Welcome to Media Watch. I'm not Stuart Littlemore, I'm Jonathan Holmes. And for the rest of tonight's show, it'll be News Limited all the way. First up, a ripper of a yarn that made it into Mr Murdoch's papers around the nation.
Party poopers.
Party's over for kids.
Banned from blowing candles.
Hygiene rules take cake.
You've got to hand it to the News Limited tabloids. They know a good story when they spot one, even when it's on page 60 of a 200-page booklet. Natasha Beta reported,
Kids will be banned from blowing out candles on communal birthday cakes under strict new hygiene rules for childcare.
Well, if it's in the telly, of course it must be true. Cue incredulity from 2GB's Ray Hadley.
This ridiculous stuff about no communal cake. For goodness sake. Strike me pink. I mean, fair dinkum.
And cue investigative journalism from Kyle and Jackie O.
Banning candles? That's so silly.
Who's done this?
The government.
Which one?
Federal.
The federal government?
Yep. What?
Which minister's in charge of that?
Oh, God, I don't even know.
Let's find out.
Of course, it hardly needs saying that the story was a beat-up. It is true that in its booklet,
Staying Healthy,
the National Health and Medical Research Council recommends that parents with kids in childcare
provide a separate cupcake with a candle if they wish for the birthday child,
as well as a communal cake or more cupcakes without candles for everyone else. But as Seven's Pippa Gardner correctly reported, this is not a new law. These are just
guidelines, and centres can choose to ignore them and put their own policies in place.
But News Limited defends calling the new guideline a ban.
The new standard on this issue is stronger and more prescriptive than the previous edition, which told centres to encourage parents to provide separate cupcakes.
There was advice about birthday cakes in a previous edition. No mention of that in any of the original News Limited stories. Here it is.
Birthday cakes and blowing out candles. One of the ways of minimising the spread of droplet infection is to encourage parents to provide individual cupcakes with a single candle on the birthday child's cake.
That edition was
endorsed December 2005.
Under the Howard government. So all the fuss and ballyhoo was actually about a mere change in wording, from encourage parents to parents should. But lest you think that News Limited beat-ups only target Labour governments, let's look at how our old friend, the Northern Territory News, has chosen to hold to account, to use one of the company's favourite phrases, the new country Liberal government in Darwin. As part of last December's mini-budget, the Territory Minister for Indigenous Advancement, Alison Anderson, issued a media release.
Eligible houses in Territory homelands and outstations will benefit from $5,200 in works under funding announced in today's mini-budget.
Note that it says eligible houses in homelands and outstations, not every householder in Aboriginal communities. Yet this is how the announcement was reported next day by the NT News.
Every Aboriginal householder living in communities is to get $5,200 to do up their homes.
2 days later, the News' Nigel Adlam repeated the claim.
The government is giving bush residents $5,200 each to do up their homes.
Adlam described the program as a Christmas present to bush residents, and an editorial on the same day went further.
Chief Minister Terry Mills is adding to the cargo cult mentality by handing out thousands of dollars. The money is a blatant election bribe.
That afternoon, Alison Anderson issued a second media release.
Bush residents are not being given a $5,200 Christmas present, and to suggest that they are is both inaccurate and inflammatory. The $5,200 will be provided to outstation service providers to be spent on necessary repairs and maintenance.
In other words, no cash handouts to anyone. The money will go to the tradies doing the repairs or to their employers, not to the people living in the houses. But this was how Nigel Adlam reported it next day.
Alison Anderson yesterday defended the Territory Government's decision to give people living in Indigenous communities and outstations $5,200 each to do up their houses.
Still sounds like a handout to me. It was only well down in the story that Adlam reported,
For the first time, Ms Anderson said the money would go to outstation service providers.
In 2 editorials over Christmas, the paper returned to its theme.
People in the bush are being favoured in an outrageous way. The government is giving them a $5,200 Christmas present. Mr Mills gave bush residents a $5,200 Christmas present. A blatant election bribe. Ordinary Territorians are being treated with utter contempt.
On the 29th of December, Nigel Adlam was back in the fray with a classic, amazing rumour denied.
Big cheques, not gifts. The Territory Government yesterday denied handing out money in the street to Indigenous people in a remote community.
But Adlam reported that a public servant
said an informant in Nookar in Arnhem Land had witnessed 2 people wearing
CLP-branded clothes,
standing under a CLP banner and handing out the cheques on December 21st.
The recipients of the cheques were taking them straight to the local store and cashing them, many buying large-size flat-screen TVs.
A third-hand fable. The public servant was convinced that the cheques were part of the government's $5,200 housing handout. The NT News printed no evidence whatsoever for that belief. Yet despite the government's denial, it still ran the story. Media Watch called the store manager at Nookar last week. He told us that
the money that was distributed in Nookar was store profits. I don't know how they got the other story.
And the country Liberals have told Media Watch that they
categorically deny that anyone from the organisation was involved in handing out money from the country Liberals or the Northern Territory Government at Nookar.
After several more stories in the same vein, Alison Anderson lost patience. The government paid for a near full-page ad in the NT News. Stories about Christmas gifts, she wrote, were
absolute nonsense. No individual will receive so much as 1 cent under this program.
And it ended,
I recall an old saying in journalism, never let the facts spoil a good story.
In late January, the News did give Alison Anderson 3 pages to explain her programme, but no apology for its intemperate editorials and no correction of its misleading stories. In a long response to our questions, NT News' editor Matt Cunningham makes this point several times.
The NT News has published the denials by the government with prominence. Its news reports on this issue have been balanced.
But Matt, reporting easily disprovable and inflammatory nonsense isn't okay just because you run a denial at the head of it. It's still inflammatory nonsense. Alas, we haven't finished with News Limited tonight. Here's a story published last October on news.com.au.
Speed up. Drivers vote to increase speed limits after report recommends limit be lowered.
It was a follow-up to a story in the Brisbane Sunday Mail the day before, which asked readers to vote on whether speed limits should be lowered. The follow-up reported,
of more than 17,000 votes cast at the weekend, almost 16,000 went for the response, no, speed limits should be raised.
Sound a bit unlikely? A week later, the reporter who'd written the original story received an email from someone called Russell Phillips.
I have a confession.
The email included a link to this blog.
The Ubermotive Guide to Media Influence.
It carried a screenshot of the story about the speed limit poll and went on,
I have some news for you. Over 15,000 of those votes were mine.
The author of the blog, Melbourne software engineer Russell Phillips, explained that as long as you clear the cookies from your computer each time you vote on a News Limited online poll,
there is nothing on their servers that will limit how many times or how often you vote. You could vote all day, but manual labour is for suckers.
Instead, Phillips used his programming skills to create a cyber robot or bot that voted for him around 15,000 times. Having warned News Limited what he'd done, he waited for a response and got none. So he kept doing it. But as he explained in a Reddit post, he tweaked his bot first.
I actually wrote a program where for each option someone voted, my program would vote once for every other option, thus maintaining a deadlock.
And News Limited would faithfully write up the completely phony results. For example,
The Great Vaccination Debate. Are you for or against? By Lucy Kippist. November the 29th, 2012. A poll run on news.com.au on Monday asking whether vaccination for children should be mandatory received more than 170,000 votes. Of those who voted, 50% agreed.
170,000 votes? Split 50-50? That same day, Phillips emailed the story's author.
Hi Lucy, I'm writing to inform you that the poll results that have made front page news have in fact been synthesised.
Once again, he was ignored. So was a colleague who emailed next day.
It is unbelievable that 170,000 people voted in your online poll. Online polls are easily hacked. Yours obviously was. When are you going to print a retraction?
Still no reaction. So Phillips's bot kept voting. For example, in a poll asking readers about Today FM's prank phone call to the Duchess of Cambridge's hospital ward. The rorted result was dutifully reported.
Yet a news.com.au poll asking whether the presenters should be blamed for the death was deadlocked at 50-50.
Once again, Phillips's colleague warned the reporter that the poll had been hacked.
A printed retraction might be appropriate. You might even wring a whole article out of it.
Well, there was no retraction, but at least news.com.au removed all reference to the rorted poll. Editor Luke McElveen now tells MediaWatch that he became aware of the poll tampering on December the 18th.
Our IT department has recently upgraded security on all News Limited online polls. While polls will continue to appear in some stories, news.com.au will not be publishing stories based on the results.
But it took a while. Right through January and into early February, Russell Phillips's bot was still finding polls to disrupt on the websites of News Limited mastheads. So far, there's been no correction by News Limited of stories based on the rorted polls and no account of how they were gamed by a reader. Luke McElveen told us,
I have not published a story about the hacker's activities because I believe this individual will not be afforded any publicity.
Nice try, Luke, but we disagree. We reckon he's demonstrated that online newspaper polls are scientifically worthless. Today, Phillips told MediaWatch that he's cracked News Limited's latest defences, and Fairfax Media's as well. This poll in The Age, he claims,
Was Environment Minister Tony Burke right to reject a bid to protect the Tarkine wilderness from mining and logging?
Was turned around by his bot just last night. Full responses and more details on our website, and next week we sincerely hope we'll find other news outlets to shove around. Till then, good night.